we've been covering the issue of family leave and other benefits for a long time on this program because we think it's an important part of building a humane society for working people and their families. There was recently, last year, an advance here in Washington, D.C. on that front. And now it appears that that advance is in danger. This is important not only, in my opinion, for the people of Washington, D.C., but as a bellwether for what might happen around the country. So here joining us now to discuss that is Carol Joyner. Carol is Director for the Labor Project for Working Families, or LPWF. That's in partnership with a group called Family Values at Work. And she is also the founding director of the 1199 SEIU Employer Child Care Fund and past president of the Child Care Corporation. So first of all, Carol, thanks so much for coming on the program.
I'm so happy to be here to talk with you all today.
So, yeah, it's such an important issue. You know, it strikes me that we hear a lot of people, particularly in politics and sometimes in business, talking about family values. But when it comes down to the kind of values that allow families to have quality time together, that allow parents to be with children, that allow families to bond with each other over the precious moments of life, those family values sometimes seem to be missing in action. And that's why we were very happy to see at this program here, we were very happy to see Washington, D.C. Come in with a program for a family leave that looked good to us. And but now I'm hearing stories about how that's in danger, and they're coming up with more business-friendly alternatives, so to speak. Could you, first of all, just fill us in on what's going on here in Washington, D.C.?
Sure. You know, we were happy, too, about a year ago when D.C. passed last December the Universal Paid Leave Act. And it passed, I believe, with 9 votes, making it somewhat veto-proof. And the bill actually called for all private sector employers in the district to pay into a social insurance fund. And once they pay a 0.62% into the social insurance fund, then the workers would be able to, you know, once the law is implemented, would be able to get 8 weeks if they need to welcome a new child or if they adopt a child, 6 weeks to care for a very sick family member, and 2 weeks for self-care. And so as I lay out this formula that everyone keeps calling 862, let's be clear that that was a compromise. Originally, when the bill was introduced, it was for 16 weeks of paid family leave for any of those events. And so we felt when the bill passed that while it was a compromise, it was probably the best of the two at the time.
So, okay.
Now,
yeah,
what's happening?
Right. Now it's happening, yeah.
So shortly after the bill was passed, and then it also, remember, we are in D.C., so it had to pass congressional review. By April of 2017, it actually got certified, and so it became a law. As soon as it became a law, members of the council received to get tremendous amounts of pressure, I believe, from the business lobby. And that business lobby, you know, was resistant to the law from the very beginning. But they began to say things like, well, if we're going to do paid family leave, let's make it an employer mandate instead of a social insurance fund where everyone pays into the social insurance fund.
Now,
so
let me
to
just
distinguish
interrupt you.
between the two,
Carol,
the employer mandate, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just ask you real quickly, why did they want that? Why would they rather have an employer mandate than a social insurance fund?
That's a really good question. And so there are, what we heard on face value was that they wanted, if they're going to pay for this benefit ultimately, and the employer does pay, if they're going to do that, they want control over it. But we have run some numbers that suggest that if you just take a person who, earns $500 a week, and that person needs 6 weeks of paid leave, right? Then the 0.62% for that person for the year would be about $161. The requirement for that person to have leave fully paid individually by the employer would be over $2,000. And so it just doesn't make sense economically. And businesses and nonprofits and the hospitals and the universities that are opposed to this in the city, know the numbers economically. So the question for us remains, why would they want to do it if it doesn't add up financially for them? My sense is, and we've talked to a lot of workers around the city, and some people believe that there are real problems with worker protections around the city. Wage theft is a huge problem. Employers don't pay the wages they're supposed to pay. Sometimes, and not all employers, but enough for it to be a problem. Mm-hmm. Paid sick days is a law in D.C. Many workers are denied the paid sick days that they are entitled to and that they have earned. And then FMLA, which is the federal law, is often cited as being denied for workers. In fact, we have several stories of workers in the district who needed FMLA, and this is unpaid leave. Right. And for a number of reasons, they were denied the leave. We think many people are concerned that the Universal Paid Leave Act, if employers control it, and if they decide when they get the benefit, how to approve the benefit and all of that, then fewer people, the people who really need the benefit, will not get it.
Well, and just so our listeners are clear, FMLA is the Family Medical Leave Act. As you say, it's unpaid leave that people by law are entitled to. And you're saying that DC employers are not, in some cases, have not allowed them to take advantage of the law, which would be a violation, I assume. And so the concern is, they may be fighting for something that on the face of it looks like it might cost them more money, but if they have the ability to control it, they just won't honor it, and then there'll be no money at all going out, and that they don't want.
Sure.
Right, as opposed to, now, just so our folks understand also, Carol Joyner, and again, Carol is the director for the Labor Project for Working Families, so our listeners understand a social insurance fund, Social Security is an example of one, Medicare is an example of one, and correct me if I'm wrong, but so money is paid in up front. It is a form of insurance to which people are entitled if they need it, so people in the current plan, they would be required to, the employers would pay in based on a percentage of payroll, small, 1.62%, and in return, if some...
0.62, not 1 point.
Oh, 0.62.
Almost a half a percent.
Thank you, even less.
A little more than a half a percent.
So even less than I thought. Difference. Yeah. Both small numbers, but a big difference in a small number. And in return, they get this benefit if they need it. Now, sounds to me like they just don't want to pay the 62%, and maybe they don't even want their employees taking advantage of this benefit when they need to take leave.
That's exactly true. And we have so many examples around the city. And you don't even have to look at D.C. During the previous administration, the Obama administration, the Department of Labor did a very good job of resolving FMLA violations. And millions of penalties were charged to employers from around the country for denying people FMLA that they were entitled to. So this isn't a secret. And, in our culture, if anyone who's worked for an employer in the past, and maybe, not all employers are like this, certainly there are great employers around the country, but there are some employers that have a culture in the workplace where not to ask for leave. If an employer has to provide individual full salary replacement or half salary replacement for a worker going out on leave because they've had a baby, everyone knows that. And people will know, well, 4 or 5 people are out now. I shouldn't ask because I know I'll be denied. Or if they just even look like they might need leave, they know that they shouldn't request it. As opposed to the Social Insurance Fund that's already been funded, workers alert their employer to the fact that I'm going to have an event where I'll need leave, I'll be gone X number of weeks, and then they file to the city in order to get their payment for that leave, the time that they're on leave. We see this as all over the world, it seems that social insurance funds and in the various states in the country where they have these programs, social insurance funds are preferred. And they're preferred for 2 reasons. One, if the employer controls the benefit in an employer mandate situation, what happens, what they've seen around the world where there are employer mandates, is that there is less attachment of women to the workplace. And so what happens is employers will hire fewer women of childbearing age, or they'll discriminate against older people because they figure maybe they'll be sick, maybe they'll want leave time, right? Or they'll discriminate against anyone else who might want to use the benefit. In a social insurance fund, that's far less likely to happen because they've already paid in. Everyone is eligible. Everyone has another space in which to go collect their funds.
Well, Carol, that is such an important point, and that gets to exactly why I wanted to talk about it, not just because we're here in Washington, D.C., and we care about Washington, D.C., but because we're a national program and because it's really important for people to understand that social insurance works for them. It's why Social Security is so popular. It's why Medicare is so popular, and that we need social insurance and why there's opposition to social insurance. So we've got about a minute left, and in that minute, so I'm so glad for that very concise and excellent explanation from you. We've got about a minute left, and I would say in that minute, can you just give us a quick sense of what might happen here in Washington going forward?
I have to say...
We just lost. Okay, it looks like we just lost Carol, actually. Looks like her call just dropped. So we will have to do this. Rather than try to pick up Carol on the air, let's just say that we will be following the story of Washington, D.C.'s employee leave battle very closely, and that we will be, we were pleased about this law because it was a national model for how cities can affect social insurance change, and we will continue to cover this story. We will continue to cover the cities of this nation as engines for progressive change, which they can be. And by the way, I would be remiss before we leave. I would be remiss if I did not point out that there has been, in my opinion, some cynical politicking here in D.C. on behalf of the mayor of this city and some members of the city council as well. So again, we will be following the DC story, but going forward, we will also be encouraging and putting a spotlight on programs like this elsewhere in the country.